So now what you've all been waiting for, and what you actually came to this room to do this morning, is to listen to our amazing keynote. Christina Goldschmidt and I go way back, way back, because we started when we were, 12, right, in the industry? That's what, yeah. We started at Discovery Channel, Discovery Health. Christina was the head designer for the organization. And since then, Christina has evolved into what is just almost seems like a fake resume. It's so impressive, right? From American Express, Morgan Stanley, Omnicom Media Group, Accenture, and now she is at Etsy as the VP and head of product design. So she has done so many things. Her resume, her portfolio, it's all very impressive. She's a well-known speaker. She is just very well-known in the industry, and I am happy to call her my friend, and I'm very excited that she agreed to do this for us. So please, a round of applause for Christina.
Thank you all for having me. I'm so happy to open today's conference with my talk on decision making in a time of uncertainty. And thanks, Sarah, for that great introduction. I think we've been working together since before that poster. So I head the product design team at Etsy, and I've done a variety of things, like I was a management consultant at Accenture working in new ventures. I've also led a variety of design teams at Fortune 500 companies, and I also really deeply care about education. And one of the places I teach is at NYU at their Stern School of Business, where I got my MBA. But I think that I have this obligation to teach business leaders about design thinking so that it helps make sure that they understand all the value that designers bring, and that it helps us continue to have and maintain our seat at the table. Normally when I'm out speaking, I might be speaking about very analytical topics like how to teach designers to do A/B testing and experimentation, or how to scale your design org, or how to speak the language of business and do stakeholder management. But we're gonna do a little something different today. So I'm sure you all feel this like I do, but these are extremely uncertain times. When we hit 2020, March, etc., I really didn't think that it would get to be any more uncertain. But for some reason, it seems to feel even more uncertain now, right? Every day there's something else, something new that pops up. We're still experiencing the pandemic in different ways, and we don't ever know if we're gonna get back to it being normal. Things are happening like banks are collapsing. We have all these different disruptions in sort of the tech industry and layoffs right now. And even there's new emerging technologies that are disrupting how we work and live that we are just now starting to interact with and understand that will have implications for our entire industry that have years to come. And so what's really interesting about this is it just feels like we're in this real collective moment of sort of uncertainty all the time. And I think for me, that feels really traumatic. I just don't know what's gonna come and what's gonna be around the corner tomorrow when I wake up. So what's also hard about that is we don't actually know that we can refer back to our methods to do our work even. Back in February in the MIT press, there was this article on a backlash on design thinking, that they basically said that we don't think it's gonna be that great anymore. Now, in my teaching, I've been telling people design thinking is not this amazing silver bullet. It does not solve everything like the poof at, when you snap your fingers, that you have to actually make sure that you're thinking about it based in reality, that you have an implementation plan, that you are taking it to its full fruition, and that it's, yes, it's wonderful, it's repeatable, it's fun, but you have to consider all of those things. And ultimately, we deserve better, right? We deserve methods that help us be grounded in things like the ethics of design, and things like justice, and things like making sure that we don't do harm, that we care, that we care about ourselves, that we care about the people we're doing work for, our users, our customers, that's really what matters. And for my day-to-day, I really need to think about all of this uncertainty, right? So how am I actually navigating complex systems? And that's the products that I'm designing, but honestly, the organization that I work in, it's extremely complex, right? It's matrixed, there are all kinds of people that help make decisions, and they have all kinds of different motivations. But then also, how do we cut through all of that noise and clutter? How do I help my team target all of the unknown things that could come up? And ultimately, how do I help them tell the best stories so that they can get their points across and really fight for the right approach and the right solutions? And then finally, how are we actually being supportive of our users, right? That combination of what's right for our business, but also what's right for our users and of our teams. How can we actually do this in a way that we're not doing any harm to them, to our larger community, and do something in a supportive way so that we are happy to go to work every day, that we feel good about the jobs that we're doing in our profession. And I think that that's really what the legacy of this 30 years of design thinking should evolve into. So I don't want to throw out design thinking. I think that there's so much good there. And so everything that I'm going to talk to you about today is actually still grounded in this larger schema of design thinking. I'm going to focus on this ideation step here in the middle, where we're going to talk about brainstorming and prototyping, things that you all do every day still. And I'm going to show you how you can use design thinking to help you make decisions in a time of uncertainty. And I'm going to give you actually a couple of methods to do that. All right. So if we think about brainstorming, when I'm teaching people how to do design thinking, I teach them sort of what I call systematic brainstorming or lateral thinking methods. And oftentimes this is where business leaders who are taking my classes get super excited because they didn't know that they could have these repeatable processes to really hack their brains. Because our brains are actually super cool, right? We can leverage our evolutionary biology to help us be able to brainstorm like whenever we want to. Because it's that idea of we are pattern making and matching sort of individuals. So if you think back, if the grasses just moved a certain way, you needed to know that little bit of information if there was a lion that was going to jump out and eat you, right? So we need to understand that. And right now, we can actually take that ability to match those patterns from very little information and use that in order to brainstorm. So things like, what's the problem at hand? How can I mash that up with a new kind of stimulus and see what my brain does with it? So that's like a traditional sort of brainstorming method. And so if you're not as familiar with these sorts of methods, here's actually some that are pretty common. And so, you know, a lot of consultancies, like maybe IDEO or something like that, they'll sell you packs where you have a bunch of methods like these. Or when I was working at Accenture, Fjord had a bunch of methods like these, where you could basically have ways of doing the systematic brainstorming. And it's really reliable. And like anything, you know, you need to practice it, but it does work. And you can get really good at this for really coming up with innovative ways to solve problems. But then, of course, you must go through the entire design thinking process, right? Prototype it, test it, validate it, and rinse and repeat. Okay. Another thing that I think is really important from that sort of brainstorming aspect of design thinking is this concept of liminal spaces. And if you're not familiar with liminal spaces, it's actually a term that we borrow from architecture, and they mean the in-between spaces. So things like hallways, doorways, actually airports are liminal spaces. So hopefully most of you just experienced that, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for me, unconscious processing in liminal spaces is a key way that I actually solve problems. So the shower is a magical transportation device for me. I can pretty much solve any problem if you give me like 24 hours to make sure I can take a shower about it. So it's really kind of funny how that works for me pretty much every time. That active unconscious processing really, really helps and really does do something for me. And so learning sort of how to leverage liminal spaces, I think, is also something really key that helps us in design thinking. Okay, so we have, these reminders and these groundings, right? I'm not going to go into detail about prototyping because I think we all know what that is. But now, how do I actually apply these concepts to, uncertainty? That's probably what you're all really wondering about. So this is my facilitation method slide, but we'll go deeper on this in a minute. But I can break it down into that sort of standard process, right? What materials do you need? Post-it notes or digital whiteboarding version of that, Sharpies, the whole 9 yards. And then you need a bunch of team members. So it really doesn't require a lot of materials, but it does require people. And basically, there are 4 major steps that you want to brainstorm. So you can leverage any of those systematic brainstorming techniques that we talked about. And the goal is to look at the problem that you are facing and trying to create a solution for, and really try to determine what are all the possible outcomes. And then you're going to prioritize, and then you're going to then create a prototype. And that prototype is a role-playing exercise. And what's key there is that you have people who have very specific roles who are going to help you run multiple simulations, i.e. multiple prototypes. And then the last step is to actually get perspective, i.e. involve a liminal space. So you can do this multiple times through that role-playing exercise after you've done all the detailed work, but hopefully this will help you to actually deeply evaluate a situation that's uncertain so that you can have a full spectrum of how to look at it and make sure that you're looking at it from all angles. So let's go detail step by step. So it's really hard when you're facing a difficult solution yourself as an individual to think of all the possible outcomes and ways to get there. And so enlisting other people and sometimes interacting with other people and using those creative brainstorming techniques can be really helpful. And I'm going to actually encourage you to go for really out there possible solutions and also sort of obscure and sometimes funny ones. Because when you push yourself to go to really far examples, i.e., and then the company implodes, and then we're taken over by aliens. When you do that, it makes your brain think differently, but there's oftentimes something in the middle that does click, and then your brain can say, even though that's not reality, there's something that's an in-between step that could be a possible solution or could be a possible outcome that you would then write down and list as one of your possible outcomes. So on Post-its, on your whiteboard, you're going to basically say, what do we think are all the possible outcomes to this question that we have? And then look at all the smaller decisions that are leading to the big decision. Do the same kind of brainstorming. And then map them on a decision tree so that you're now going to have these journeys that are getting you to possible ways to solve for this solution. Now, you cannot possibly think of everything that's going to happen, right? We cannot actually predict the future, but that's your goal, is to try and get as many paths as possible. So just choose an appropriate time-bound time that you want to do this for, because it's the act of sort of having confidence and knowing that you've gone pretty far that matters. All right, now, once you've mapped that all out and you can see this sort of larger set of possibilities, now you want to prioritize your sort of criteria for how you make decisions. And I actually do this second as opposed to doing it first, because I think that when you have a much wider set of outcomes, it'll actually lead you to thinking about your prioritization differently. That if I were to set my prioritization beforehand, I might actually have a different emotional response, or I might be actually missing some of the things that matter to me. Because when you're brainstorming on all those solutions, you're gonna be talking, right? And you're gonna be thinking, and you're gonna start to be processing. So that's gonna help you actually get some information coming that's gonna help you with this step. So now what you're going to do is set out, these are all of these ways that I think that I would make this decision. And make sure that you have a clear way to prioritize. Some things could be equal. And then also, I think it's really important to put down what your greatest fears are. Because even though it may not be how you're prioritizing the decision, they are back there in your subconscious, and they are driving your decision. Because your fears are the things you're trying to avoid, or the things that you are worried about. So just voice them. And I know it's hard because sometimes it makes you vulnerable to list your fears, but it's really a big part of your decision-making process. And it will help you really see what might be blocking you from making the decision in the first place. Okay, now, what I consider the most fun part is the role play. It's very important that you basically give out a couple of roles, and I think that you should run this multiple times, because when you are trying out the different roles and trying to role play like you are that role, your brain will work differently and think differently about the problem. So you should take a turn being yourself the decision maker. You should take a turn being a major stakeholder. I.e. that could be like your boss, or it could be like the CEO, or it could be a client, that kind of type thing. Then you should take a turn being a major dissenting opinion. And now that role can be slightly flexible because it could be about one dissenting opinion about one of the paths. So that role might shift as you're looking at different parts of the possible solutions. But so decide how that would go fluidly throughout your role play. And then you could also have different roles for experts. So as you're trying to decide something, someone might be an expert around a particular part of that decision-making process. Because remember, there are steps, right? We talked about some of the sub-steps and things like that. So someone should play an expert on a particular part or a particular input to that. And then you also, if your team is larger, you can have a couple of sort of guest seats where people can come in during the conversation if they have an aha idea or if they have something to add. So allow it to be sort of a more open conversation. And so remember, this is your prototype. So you're running simulations during this role play on how this group of people in this way would discuss making a decision. Then, that leads to a particular set of outcomes. You record that, write it down, you switch roles, and then you do it all over again. And I've found that when different people sit in different roles, they think differently, they bring different perspectives, and sometimes, not always, sometimes often, they come to a different outcome because they have that different perspective. So, and when you are trying to embody yourself, you make decisions differently. When you're playing the dissenter, you might actually push for a completely different outcome than when you were playing yourself. And so I think that's a really, really interesting exercise to get used to. And it also can have a lot of empathy that you're having for the larger situation. But I really, 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 really think if you have the time to run this where you as the decision maker play as many roles as possible, because it will really help you see the whole 360 view around the situation. All right, and then the last thing, take that beat, take that breath, do that unconscious processing, and make sure that when you pull together all of the information, that you are actually happy with the final outcome. I think taking a couple of moments of distance really can be the most helpful thing you can do. Now, if you come back after taking that time and you have a complete 180 decision and you tell your team, my gut says that we came up with the wrong decision after we just ran, a 3-hour simulation. I think you need to explain more than just my gut thinks that, right? Like, I think that you need to go deeper and explain how you came to why it doesn't feel right, or maybe you need to keep investigating why it doesn't feel right. But I do believe that your unconscious or subconscious is telling you something, and it means that you don't have enough information yet to move forward. So trust in that feeling, but be able to defend it and be able to know why. I think that that's really important. All right. So I know that was very abstract. So let me tell you about a time when I actually ran through this experience and what was happening to me. So I had a moment where my boss indicated that at some point in the future, we were going to have a reorg. She didn't know what it was going to be about or when it was going to be, but that we were going to have a reorg. That causes a lot of anxiety. That's a lot of uncertainty. And some other history about reorgs in my company was that when reorgs had happened in the past, they always were heavily focused on product management and engineering. And for design, we were basically an afterthought. And we were sometimes given a couple of hours, or if we were lucky, a couple of days to decide how we were going to react and then move to work within this reorg. So now that I have a little bit of information that there's a reorg coming, I am not going to let that time go to waste, right? So I called together my senior leadership team, all of my directors and senior directors that work for me, and was like, okay, no one be freaked out. This is a great opportunity for us. There's possibly a reorg coming. I don't have any information, but let's not repeat any of the pain that we've had in the past. Let's actually take this moment to do some advanced planning, run some scenarios, and see if we can figure out what we want to do. So we actually mapped out all kinds of different approaches of what we guessed that reorg might do and why that reorg might happen in the future. Completely, not grounded in anything that we knew, just guesses, right? But pretty good information because we all work in that organization. And also things that we thought could be factors coming about the company and about the external markets. All those things were things that we took into account. And so we had our larger board, and then we also looked at all of these different ranges of organizational models along an entire spectrum, right? And it's really this entire spectrum of a completely sort of centralized internal services model, or what someone might call an in-house agency model, to what we had at that moment, which was a completely decentralized and embedded model, which oftentimes is referred to as a squads model. And so we were working under that sort of one-size-fits-all, very pure squads model. And we knew that basically caused us every single time that there was a reorg that we had to dramatically shift to match whatever was going to happen in product and engineering. And so what we ended up coming out with was a hybrid model. Surprise, right? But what we looked at that we really liked was something a little bit to the left of the decentralized and embedded squads model, which we would call a pods model, right? Where we were grouping designers instead of a one-to-one, one designer in one particular space, where we started to group them. Another input that we were taking into account that I didn't mention was that we had gotten some engagement survey results back, that our team was also looking for more growth and developmental opportunities. And so we were like, oh, this is another factor that we can come into play, because if we do something like a pods model, we can have senior ICs on our team also do more in terms of growth and development for the more junior ICs, and that actually is a growth and development opportunity for them. And it also sort of like shares some of the burden with the managers on our team who are also sort of, needing more support themselves. But that in and of itself wasn't enough to solve for all the problems. And this came out of some of the conversations when people were role-playing some of the dissenting opinions, things like playing finance, who was like, oh, I can't give you everything, right? Like I need to have as strict of a one-to-one ratio as possible. Or playing a fellow product or engineering leader who really prefers that one-to-one parallel structure. We then also came up with the idea of a smaller agency-like team who could then look at future forward ideas and work in a slightly different way. Very small team, but that who could basically go look at things that those teams didn't have the chance to look at. So we were basically picking and choosing in order to solve all kinds of different things. And I don't think that we would have come to that outcome if we weren't trying to put on the hats of everybody that we knew would be those different types of roles. All right, so I basically have been talking to you about how to predict the future, right? And for me, I have lifted this leadership competency here. You identify and address areas of potential conflict within your team and your broader org before conflict arises. This is actually a competency from a leadership competency map. I don't know if this is something that resonates for you, is something similar to something you might have seen, but from my perspective, this is basically telling you that as a leader, you have to predict the future and solve for it once you have predicted it. And I think that really, for me, causes all kinds of anxiety. And why I've developed these kinds of methods is because it's now part of my job to do this. I have to head off all kinds of issues before they arise. That's actually part of my job. And that can be really hard, and that's a hard muscle to develop, right? And it also puts us into a really difficult position because though we are doing that, we also have to make sure that we're not inducing that anxiety into our organization, right? And so for me, if I were to hear, oh, there's going to be a reorg, how I tell that to my immediate direct reports and leaders on my team changes their experience, right? My ability to then talk to them and say, this is a great opportunity. This is a fun exercise that we can do. We can all be strategic leaders, right? How I position that experience and that opportunity and give them agency, dramatically different than saying, there's gonna be a reorg. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It's gonna be like last time and it's gonna be horrible, right? Totally different. So, I will say for me, luckily, I'm actually someone who has generalized anxiety disorder. So I'm very used to working in a state of anxiety all the time. I actually am someone who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD. And so states of anxiety are really my normal. And while I'm out there, I'll just throw out that I'm also someone who's dyslexic, because why not share all my things, right? And so the reality is that I am used to doing this, that it is my normal. And unfortunately, I have heard from other design leaders that, like me, they think that their trauma and their sort of mental health issues also make them really great design leaders. And as I started talking about this world of uncertainty and the trauma that we are all facing because of this uncertainty, statistics show that 10% of people that experience trauma will develop PTSD. And I do not wish that on any of you. As someone who has dealt with it, it is not fun and it is hard. And though I can look at it as having benefits, it's definitely not, there are other ways to get those benefits, right? And I bring this up because I think that there are other ways to make sure that you don't have to experience these things and to learn from the journey that I've been on. So I've been on more than a decade-long healing journey for myself, which I think has made it possible for me to come and share all this with you and to share other methods of how to deal with uncertainty. And so I've been doing a lot of research into neuroscience and really investigating it. And I have a paper that's being published this month or actually last month, in an academic book put out by Routledge. And thank you. And it's actually all about the linkages between design thinking and how it can help people prepare to heal themselves from trauma. So that specifically systematic brainstorming and liminal spaces are really amazing practice for people who are about to undertake some of the best healing modalities for PTSD. And just a quick information about that, like something like a liminal space is a technique that they use, or is very similar to a technique that one uses to learn how to help yourself get out of intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, things like that, which are very common in PTSD. So all of the stuff that I'm talking about today in terms of design thinking, the reason why I don't want you all to throw it out because of that MIT article is because I think that it has larger benefits besides just our work. All right, so for me, some of my most traumatic experiences and some of when I've had my worst symptoms, unfortunately have actually come because of my work as a design leader and have happened in this job working in toxic environments and working with leaders who are not as interested in making environments that are safe for employees. And this is a picture of the 34th Street Penn Station subway, where at one moment I actually had a complete moment of disassociation and really was not able to find my way, got totally lost, and and it led to depression and honestly to some suicidal ideation. And to have that come because of a work situation is something that I really do not want to happen for any of you. And it came because of a really, 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 really uncertain moment where there was a potential merger and it made people act in a way that was not their normal, and it really made people turn on each other. And that is not what we need in our environments, because we as a profession are here to solve problems and to work together. And I think that that's something that I want to share because I don't want anyone to ever have that experience or to have it affect your mental health in the way that it has mine. And so on my healing journey, when you have that moment where you're faced with something so serious in your life, you basically do what I do, which is to try and solve that problem. And so I have basically tried every single therapy under the sun, right? I've done it all. I've been very lucky to work with a therapist who has been super supportive and who has helped me to seek out a variety of different experts. And so I've tried all these things, right? From medications to EMDR to hypnosis, somatic processing, visualization techniques, journaling, drawing. Drawing is great, actually. It helps you connect a lot of things. A process called internal family systems, crafting safe liminal spaces, that word comes up again, and actually even applied for psychedelic clinical trials. So I've done all those things. And then I went deeper. I tried alternative therapies, craniosacral therapy, Reiki, worked with a cuddlist, tried forest bathing and sound bathing. And then I was like, wait, I think there's more. So then I went full woo-woo and tried some mystical things too. And I tried breath work, tarot, and I even worked with a shaman. And the real funny thing was that it was these mystical things that actually really stuck with me. And what was interesting was that they, regardless of if you believe in the mystical or not, were using the same, accessing my subconscious, we're using the same things as what we have been talking about this entire time in design thinking. And so I have held on to these practices and now use them in my work because I think that they can actually help you navigate uncertain times. So I know that you are probably like, wait, what? I did not sign up for this today at all, and I did not think this lady was going here. But I actually think that some of you are what I like to call mystical curious. And that's because I think the mystical is actually coming up in our day-to-day lives all the time. So New York Times bestselling book, The Cloisters, is all about tarot. We see things like shamans who are on the first episode of the last season of Billions on Showtime. Jason Momoa on Slumberland on Netflix, which you can go stream, is basically guides taking you on a shamanic journey. They just call it the dreamland, but it is really a great depiction of what it's like to journey with a guide. And then on things like the Today Show, I've seen Al and Hoda go do breath work and talk about how it was great, it was emotional, and how they saw things. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then on Etsy, so on Etsy, we have 88.3 million buyers, right? So 88.3 million buyers. I think that's a decent sample size, right? Like, that's some good data. And so this is Dana on Cheddar News. She was talking about a really important trend, which is New Age ritual. And back in September of 2021, the #1 selling product on Etsy was a future soulmate psychic reading and drawing. And back last holiday season, 2022, it was back in the top 5. So 88.3 million buyers. I think that some people in this audience may be mystical curious. Now, I will say, don't go buy that product. It's just for entertainment. Don't go buy it. Don't go buy it. But it's really funny. Go read the reviews, though. It is hilarious. So let me tell you about these 3 methods of breathwork, shamanic journeying, and tarot, how you can do them, and I'll give you case studies of how you can apply them. Of course, I'm continuing to talk about how I apply them in leadership, but really these can be applied anywhere, just like that first process we were talking about. So breath work. It comes from holotropic breath work, which was coined by Stan Grof, who's a psychiatrist, who back in the 60s invented it when psychedelics were outlawed. And it was a way to continue studying psychedelic phenomenon, but completely without drugs, and just by using people's breath. And so this is a slightly more gentler version of that same approach. And all it is it's a 3-part breath. So you breathe in through your mouth, filling your belly, in through your mouth, filling your chest, and then out through your mouth again. It's just like this. And just do that over and over and over again. And you oftentimes wear an eye shade so that you can focus innerly. You play some nice music. I actually work with a guide or a practitioner, like a therapist, if you will. Because when I work with a breathwork guide, they really help me to push through if I'm getting blocked or stuck and help me just move through. But this is really interesting because it's like a way to tap into your subconscious and instantly go into a liminal space. And I consider this, and everyone who does breath work considers this an active form of meditation. I was never able to do traditional meditation because the idea of quieting my mind does not work for me. I just can't sit there and like do a mantra and think of nothing. My brain just goes and goes and goes and goes. And so what this allows me to do is to focus on my breath, be active in experiencing my body, and actually seeing what comes to mind. And I'm then able to see what I can actually see and experience. And I will go in with an intention, but I don't always come out with the exact one-to-one correlation, right? And I find that I learn what I need to learn. Again, takes practice, but sometimes it's also just a way to get relaxed. Your breath is very powerful and is a tool that we all have that you can use to ground yourself. So let me share a quick case study. So though I'm up here talking to you all, I also get stage fright. And the first time I started to talk about these sort of innovative techniques or these techniques borrowing from the mystical, I was scared out of my mind. I was not sure that people would laugh when I would start to talk about them. I thought that people might be offended and get up and leave the room. I wasn't sure that people were actually interested in hearing me talk about these things. And so I actually did a breathwork session about how I could build that presentation in such a way that I could, one, calm my nerves, but more importantly, make it palatable to my audience. And two things emerged. One was how to structure the presentation. And what came up for me was, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but Hannah Gadsby did a great comedy special called Douglas. And at the beginning of her special, she gives a preview of her entire show. And it's brilliant because she tells you everything she's going to tell you in about like 2 minutes, including her diagnosis with autism and like funny moments that you're not going to expect. And it really helps her land the ending because she's sort of preparing you for something that she can then like nail at the end, but it's great. And it occurred to me that if granted, I'm not as funny as she is, right? And I don't have the comedic timing or writing abilities that she does. But if I borrowed from her, that I could give my audience an entire preview of what I was going to show that day, and then give them the opportunity to opt out of my presentation. And that felt to me very safe and also very protective of my audience and myself. That if I told them what to expect with complete transparency, that it would give them control to know what to expect and what to do. And so that was like this major relief moment that alleviated so much anxiety for me. And then the next thing that came out of it was this term, mystical curious. It's how I coined what to call this phenomenon that I was seeing in all of this data, which I think is like cute, you know, like it's no like genius term or anything, but it was a way that I could make this also more palatable. How could I make it approachable to talk about what can be considered dark or the occult, or could be considered, you know, not ready for polite society? But I could make it lighter and fun, right? And talk about being mystical curious. And so those two things were thoughts that came to me after 45 minutes of just breathing. Breathing with intention, with my guide, helping me to understand what I needed to know that day to help me move forward. All right, so let's move on to shamanic journeying. So it's very similar, but instead of the breathing, though you could add the breathing in if you want to, shamanic journeying is also accessing your subconscious in a liminal space, but it's a slightly different technique. And this is actually sort of all about visualization. And what happens is that you sort of set intention and then you help yourself visualize to access your subconscious. And I think that it actually kind of borrows elements of hypnosis. So you're kind of sort of light hypnotizing yourself, which I know because I did do hypnosis, right? Remember that from a couple slides ago? And so if you're going to do it from a peer perspective, you do things like set intentions, call the spirit world in, cleanse yourself. Do that if you want to or not, I don't care, right? But that, I'm going to tell you the real procedure, and you can decide if you want to do that or not. But again, requires a blindfold. All of these things, like a blindfold, help you think innerly so that you're not distracted by other things. And then something that's really important is a sonic driver. And what that is oftentimes a single drum beat. So the repetitive of the drum beat actually helps you go deeper. And this is actually something that I think is what people are trying to achieve with those mantras in meditation, but were not really working for me, but the drum beat does it for me every time. And now I do have a drum at home that I can play, but you can just download a track on YouTube, and I have all those links for you later if you want. But there's something about that drum beat that helps you just, and you sort of tune it out, to be honest. You don't hear it, but the drum beat helps you move along. And then you want to actually visualize a series of steps that help you get ready to receive this information or have this dialogue with your self-conscious. And the most important are two things. One is a portal to enter into the earth. So like a tree that has a hole in it. And then the next is going down a set of stairs. Because when you go down the set of stairs, you count backwards from 10. And that's the bit that's borrowed from hypnosis. And then you visualize whatever you want to visualize. But let me share a little bit more about that. So I had an experience once where a boss of mine gave me really confusing feedback. And in the span of just a couple of weeks, I went from getting really fantastic praise to really confusing, not fully grounded, very critical feedback. And this was extremely jarring to me. Hopefully this doesn't resonate with you and you haven't been in this experience, but maybe you have. And it was really hard for me to figure out how to move forward from that. And so I did a shamanic journey to figure out how am I supposed to process this? What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to get out of my state of anxiety to actually do something about this now? And so what I did was, for my cleansing, I visualized being filled with golden light and breathing out negativity. And then I visualized going into this cherry tree, this little hole in this cherry tree. And then I visualized counting backwards down the stairs. And then I went into what is my inner school. So my nice little place inside where I can be ready to receive wisdom. And for me, inner schools look like sacred architecture of cathedrals for some odd reason. I think it's because I went to Catholic school, I don't know. But, so they just look nice and pretty. And then what I did was I invited in my inner teacher. So for me, in this case, I have lots of them, but for this case, it was like a past life version of myself. But it could be a helping spirit, an animal, a past ancestor. It could be anything, right? It could be a cartoon character that you enjoy. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever shows up for you to have a dialogue with you. And so this past life version of me told me, now remember, this is my subconscious, so this is just me telling me something, right? She told me that he's got to be going through something. It will reveal itself later what he's going through and what caused this. And you have to just get through the moment so that it will all make sense for you. If you totally break down right now, you are not going to get through this and through this moment to figure it out and to actually be able to help yourself and help him. So stop it, but you can do it, right? And then what she did was she shared with me a ritual that I could do. That I could burn a candle, that I could write an intention on a sage leaf, and that I could take back agency and control. Now, I'm not someone who practices magic, so I don't know where I got this thing or where she got this thing, but I did it and I liked it because I felt like I just had something to do, right? It just gave me something to do so that I felt like I could move forward. And having a sort of like a mantra was something that I could leave that session with, and whenever I was having anxiety about the issue, I just had that mantra to repeat. And sure enough, it took about 3 weeks, but I figured out the entire situation of why my boss had that reaction and what ended up happening. And we got through it, and we got past it, and and it all worked out in the end. But I was able to just access my self-conscious, calm myself down, figure out a way forward. All right, the last thing I'm going to share with you about is tarot. So tarot, I think, works much more like those systematic brainstorming techniques, where you can look at a set of cards and say, oh, what do I think of when I see these cards? That you can use them to really ask yourself, how does this help me think differently about this problem? Now, you can also use traditional spreads and start to read the tarot and go study deeper on them, and that works too, but it's up to you how you want to approach it. Now, anyone who studies the tarot will tell you that they are not actually about predicting the future. They are actually just a book of wisdom, and there are a system by which you investigate yourself and interactions with other people in the world around you. So I want you to take that away, that that's what they're for. They're not, like, ooh, I pulled a death card and I'm gonna die. It's not that, right? Whatever you saw in the James Bond movie is not right. And so there are 3 super basic spreads that I think really work well in work. And honestly, let's be real, they're all I kind of know. So you don't need to be a very super advanced tarot card user to use them. But a 1-card spread, I consider it a gut check. Like, you're asking yourself, what do I think, yes or no, about a situation? And so a quick way to think about that is someone I work with, Leslie, went through a reorg, and she was asking herself, now that we've gone through this reorg and we have this new challenge that I'm facing, do I have the right team to do the work that we're doing? And so it wasn't an absolute yes or no, but she was asking herself, what's my gut feeling there? And she pulled a yes card, and so that gave her this moment of relief that she knew that she had the people that she needed and she could just move forward and stop worrying about it. Or a 3-card spread, which is you ask yourself, what do I need to know about a situation? I love this spread if I'm having a stakeholder management issue, because it's telling me, just sort of giving me more information about a situation. And so a good case study sort of approach is, what's the most important thing I need to know to properly manage stakeholders for a successful outcome? And so that's like a question you would ask, and then you would pull the spread, and then you would see what it sort of tells you. And then something that I really like is a 4-card spread, because you ask yourself a question like, what would happen if I do X? And then you pull another 4-card spread, and you would say, what would happen if I didn't do X? So it gives you like both sides of a coin, if you will. And so there's a way to cut the cards if you do the 4-card spread. And so for time purposes, we'll just focus on that today. So you shuffle, you think about your question, and then you lay out the cards in this way. You put the first stack, and then you cut it in half. And then you cut the first stack in half again, and then you cut the second stack in half. And then you flip them over, and you read them. And so I had a direct report that worked for me, and he had this issue where during the pandemic, he was trying to decide where him and his family should move. And they were trying to decide between 4 different cities. And it went on for a year. They could not decide for a year where they were going to move between these 4 different cities. And so he was spending all of his energy outside of work looking at Zillow in all of these different cities, trying to figure out where they should go, but not being able to truly decide. And so I told him to buy a deck of cards and that I would teach him how to do this spread so that he could actually help himself come to an answer. Because honestly, it was getting in the way of us being able to do work, because we would spend every single one-on-one talking about this, at least for a portion of that time, right? So it was the most important thing in his life. And so for one of the cities, he ended up getting this spread. And so for the first card, which in this position, it's sort of the conscious card or what's happening right now position, and he pulled the hermit in the reverse position. And what that told him was that he was taking too much time to do personal reflection. I think a year is too much time to do personal reflection about something, right? And so he basically was sort of like not fully considering everybody else's opinion, and that he was in himself. That's what this card was telling him. And though he knew it, he didn't know it. So it was very helpful for someone to tell him that, right? Sort of a little bit of a wake-up call. And then in his conscious, like subconscious mind position, which is the second card, he pulled the Three of Pentacles. Three of Pentacles is all about collaboration. But it also meant that he had everything he needed if he collaborated more. That he could already go into planning stages and put this idea into motion. And that he just needed to think more deeply about that collaboration so that he could make this decision. And then in his superconscious or his higher self position, this third position, he pulled the Judgment card, which is such a beautiful card to pull because it's all about sort of your intuition, rebirth, a spiritual awakening, that it's letting him know that he really could learn from his past and move forward. So really encouraging him to do this thing. And then in the last position, the result position, it was upright, so it was like, this is a good place to move, but he pulled the Death card. And the Death card is not a card to be scared of. It actually stands for rebirth and changes and possibilities. And so the net of this reading was that he actually had everything he needed. He just needed to look at working with the people in his life differently, thinking about his relationship to his in-laws differently, and thinking about what his children's needs were differently. And that those were the two types of conversations he should have with his wife. And that was how they should make the decision. Where were their kids going to get what they needed, and which of their in-laws were going to support them and their kids on that. And that's really that sort of collaboration, rebirth kind of type topic. And so I'm very happy to say he moved and he's been living there for several years now and he's pretty happy. So I know I've shared a lot with you today, and I know that, again, these are very uncertain times, but my hope is that you will look at these problems that you're facing and now have a variety of tools by which you can tackle them. And maybe you were thinking about some of these practices and didn't even know that you had permission to use them in a work context, or were curious and didn't know how to. But the one thing that I want to really urge you to do is to always consider your and your team's mental health first and foremost. I think that that's the most important thing that we have an obligation to do as leaders, and also in the practice of design. All right, so if you want to get in touch with me, here are the ways to do so. And I have a whole bunch of resources, and these are actually up on my website at cgoldschmidt.com. If you just scroll down, there's an immediate link about the UXPA where you can download these. You can also download a sample guided shamanic journey if you want to give that a try. And there's also a copy of the slide deck if you want it. It's all up there now if you would like to. But with that, I'm happy to take any of your questions. Yeah, and I think there are mics around the room, so if you want to raise your hands, they will come to you.
Hi, not so much a question, but just a comment with your stage fright that you've overcome and the stigma of mental health issues. I just want to compliment you on your courage to come up and speak on those today. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's me. Hi. Have you ever used all 3 techniques to figure out a problem?
I have not needed to use all 3 at once because I normally will start 1, maybe 2, and get an answer. Yeah, I can normally get someplace with 2 of them, maybe 1. But I also practice these techniques a lot. So I'm someone who I consider myself a brain hacker and have considered myself a brain hacker for 25 years, right? Like if you work in a high pressure agency environment, you're hacking your brain all the time, right, to perform creativity. And so because I'm so practiced, I can sort of get there and I sort of know what I need when I need it. So if I'm heavily working with other people, I will go to tarot because I think tarot really helps me understand people well that I don't have control over and understand and read a situation better. If I need to overcome something in myself, I need to figure out if I need help and support from someone or if I need something for myself, and then that'll help me choose if I go to shamanic journeying or if I need breath work. And also sometimes if I need to calm myself down, that's more of a breath work thing than it is sometimes shamanic journeying, but yeah. But, you know, also I think you get to know which one works for you, because all 3 may not work for you. And so I think that that's also part of it too.
Hi, thank you so much. Many of us work in corporate or academic contexts where talking about mysticism is not cool.
Yeah.
But often these paths are the way that we uncover something new. Do you have any counsel on like kind of hiding the vegetables in the pasta sauce? Like you're like, I'm not really telling you, but I'm teaching you how to hack your brain.
Yeah.
But we're not calling it that. We're just calling it brainstorming.
Yeah. So everything that I've talked about today is all the same thing. So we have gone through multiple times systematic brainstorming, liminal spaces, prototyping. Everything is in basically design thinking and a version of those things. You can have people do a shamanic journey and just not say you're doing a shamanic journey. You can have people do breath work and basically just say, hey, we're just going to try and clear our heads and do it. You can say guided meditation for both of those 2 things and people will be cool with it, right? Tarot gets a little bit harder because when you pull out a tarot deck, people know what that is. But there are a ton of different tarot decks out there that look less like tarot decks. And so actually on Etsy, I know a fellow Etsyan who made a tarot deck all about IKEA. And so, so it just looks like IKEA drawings about IKEA things. And I know that there are tons of different forms of tarot decks that look less mystical, but that are based in the tradition. And so like one of the resources I have up here is actually how to look up sort of things about tarot. So like I really use the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Smith is actually from Brooklyn, so I really like go out to my girl, but since I'm from New York City, but things under, let's see, there are definitely definitions under Biddy Tarot that would apply to any deck if you pull up the Death card or the 3 of Wands, regardless of what the picture is. And you can do the spread and then go look that thing up. Or you can do the method of saying, what does this picture say to you? Let's see what you think, sort of type thing. And I think it would still be helpful and beneficial.
Hi, Christina.
Yeah. Okay, last question.
Hi. Christina, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us today. Being in I think, a rather traditional finance culture myself. I'm wondering if you have any guidance on, in those moments of high urgency, anxiety, get everything done, overwork, in those moments where you don't have maybe the time to process and breathe and whatever, do you have any guidance on how to act, how to speak, how to put yourself out there and assert yourself in those mental health needs? Any ideas there?
Yeah, well, you can breathe all on your own, you know? And that's actually why I like breath work so much, is because it's private, you can do it, and you can do it for 5 seconds in the bathroom if you want. And so having come from those environments and worked in those environments, I think that it's all about stealing away time and space for yourself, even in just a couple of seconds. And whatever you can do to get your own composure. So for example, I now do AMAs with my team every month, and they are very savvy, and they ask me really hard, difficult questions. And I have figured out ways to stall and ask them clarifying questions and things like that to help myself try and figure out how I'm gonna answer their questions. But practicing whatever you need to get through an environment, or giving yourself a moment to take away and ground yourself. Something we didn't talk about that comes from EMDR is something called bilateral stimulation. So the act of walking is bilateral stimulation, but tapping on either side of your leg is also bilateral stimulation. And you could do that with 2 fingers, and it's actually pretty calming. And so there are other techniques like that that you can start to learn as you're diving into sort of more psychological techniques for trauma. Things like just, when I get really anxious, I'll do things like pull out some perfume out of my bag, or spell a 5-letter word backwards in my head. There are techniques like that that come out of trauma that you can research, that you can do privately in an instant, that just calm you and change you from your lizard brain to your human brain. Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much.